the Anodyne channel.
All right, good afternoon. Dr. Olson here with Anodyne Pain and Wellness Solutions of Aurora. Here with our friend Joel Frieders, who's with Hope for the Day Foundation, and we wanted to kick off just a roundtable conversation. Most specifically, September is Suicide Prevention Month. And we asked Joel here, he's with Hope for the Day, which does a lot of educational resources and awareness on suicide. And for us in the chronic pain world, we know that there's a strong correlation between chronic pain and suicide, chronic pain and depression. And then we feel that the mental health aspect is often left out or kind of the stepchild in the healthcare industry. I noticed on your site the idea of stigma, and I think that's all too prevalent in our society. The second that we mention mental health, there's almost a physiological withdrawal of people. We don't want to dive into that, and I think we forget that it's an illness, not dissimilar to cancer or other physiological things that naturally breed a lot of compassion for people or from people. Yet when we get into the mental health aspect, it seems like that compassion kind of leaves because it's unknown and kind of freaks people out. So we just wanted to have a conversation with you. Tell us a little bit about your foundation and what you do, and maybe a little bit about how you got into it.
Sure. So my name is Joel Frieders. I'm 40 years old. I'm a Scorpio. I like long walks on the beach and fluffy white pillows. And I work with an organization called Hope for the Day. We're a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Chicago. And we focus on proactive suicide prevention through mental health education programming. And while it sounds, super general when I say stuff like that, the educational component that we have, we've developed a curriculum that's clinically backed, but it's always peer delivered, meaning that someone like me who's not a licensed clinician can go in there and tell you how I'm connected to mental health and how it's impacted my life. Hope for the Day, the entire organization is filled with people that have been negatively impacted by mental health, be it themselves or the loss of another one, to suicide. And it's inspiring that I've been involved with this organization because that's how I found them in the first place. So like I said, I'm 40. When I was 37, I lost one of my favorite people on the planet to suicide. In July 2017, my friend Mike Malinowski completed. And it was one of those things where I was kind of on the precipice of finally feeling like an adult. And within 24 hours of hearing that news, I didn't know what to do with myself. Couldn't talk, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was incredibly uncomfortable everywhere I was. But unfortunately, or fortunately, because of the same time that I couldn't really function, I also was forced, I'm an elected official in Yorkville, Illinois, not too far from here. So I still had to show up at meetings and be in public. And my mayor at the time, Gary Galinsky, was noticing that I was completely unengaged, didn't really care what was going on, just kind of going through the motions, smiling at it, right? How you doing? Fine, just let it go. And he gave me a call one night when I was sitting there and he asked me what I was doing, and I was literally doing nothing. The TV was that way, my wife was watching TV, I was staring at a vent for the air return from my air conditioner, just like, what are you doing? Nothing. And his response was, well, what can we do? I'll wait. And it was the first time I ever distinctly remember somebody saying, what can we do about this? And I'd never been forced to focus on, all right, what's the problem? Normally when we're talking about, depression or mental health, there's always this, why do you feel like this? And he didn't do that. He said, what has been happening? So I was listing it out. So it was a good reference to what they teach you in mental health first aid. You want to ask what questions, not why questions. Because I didn't have to justify that I felt like, dirt.
Right.
I was literally hitting the bullet points of what was making me feel this way. So when I got it off my chest, I felt better. But then his question was, what are we going to do about it? And it wasn't a what are you going to do about it? It was a what are we going to do about it? And I was like, well, what are we going to do about it? And he basically said, play to your strengths. What do you like doing? I like communicating. I like writing. I like music. I like art. Well, I eventually found Hope for the Day, which is an organization that achieves suicide prevention through advocacy, outreach, and education. So they are at concerts and festivals, of course not now because of the pandemic and all, but their presence isn't meant to be, butterflies and rainbows and everything's going to be okay. It's basically saying it's okay not to be okay. The way that it is the way that it is, and nobody can tell you any different. And when you brought up, chronic pain, I can think back to, I've had some relatively recent painful episodes having to do with physical pain where I tried to shut myself up like it wasn't that big of a deal, like somebody else's problem is bigger than mine. I would stigmatize myself to not express, and I would end up suppressing, which ends up led to a depression. So being aware of the fact that we shut ourselves up is kind of what Hope for the Day is doing this month for Suicide Prevention Month, is we're telling people to tell stigma how they really feel. Because if you can get it off your chest and express yourself in a safe space, why is it that we feel the need to suppress ourselves in places that might not be designated safe spaces? But that doesn't mean that you have to belittle yourself into assuming that what you're experiencing isn't real or isn't important. So it's like you have the conversations once in a while about, well, I don't want to tell somebody that I got a flat tire when they just found out their mom has cancer. And it's not that you want to tell the person who just found out their mom has cancer that you got a flat tire that you feel bad. But you don't have to suppress the fact that having a flat tire is a stressful episode.
Right.
So it's not that they can't coexist, it's just that you have to kind of know your audience. But by destigmatizing yourself from being allowed to express those things, I could call a friend and tell them what bothers me. Even if that friend just found out bad news, he knows that I'm not trying to overshadow him. We're not stealing thunder here. But it's getting back to the art of conversation and starting the conversation just about how you're doing and being specific, not just blowing it off.
I think that's super important in the idea of just starting the conversation. Too much of our world and space right now is not having meaningful, productive conversations, and that's for another topic.
Yeah,
but,
we're both talking at brick walls, that's for sure.
You brought up a couple of really good points that I think are important. Is one, I picked up on the idea of this sense of community, that we need each other to get through some of these life struggles. And I think often our society conditions us or shames us if we're not strong enough or big enough or tough enough that we really don't matter. And giving voice to what's internally going on, and for us in the physical medicine world, acknowledging what's physically going on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great work going on, really looking at the neuroscience that these two things are interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Great book called The Body Keeps the Score really is indicating that trauma and loss can be literally processed outside of the brain, can be processed physically.
Yeah.
And so we need to do a better job about having that conversation. And I'm super encouraged that you found a group and that there's a group out there specific for suicide that builds that sense of community, creates, as you said, the safe space, right? We have to have a safe place. You have to be able to be vulnerable, and recognize that there's people that will be empathetic with you in that space. Your mayor, that what question and the what and the we, right?
Yeah.
What can we do?
Yeah.
Was truly an expression of empathy. You're not alone.
Exactly.
And I recognize over the course of my life, and most recently the last 3 years, trauma affects us, and everybody has a story. And everybody has a story, and most of the time, I know nothing about their story.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to give each other a little bit of grace.
Yeah.
Super interesting topic. I find in my world, you talked about this trauma, right? A lot of what you described was the trauma reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Your prefrontal cortex is shut off from the center part of your brainstem, which literally is in survival mode. That's why you couldn't think and be interactive, because you were literally in, holy cow, my whole world had just shifted.
Yeah, and the word trauma itself, if you ask 100 people, have you been traumatized? I bet you 99 would say no, because trauma is like on this pedestal of airplane crash, you got carjacked sometime, you were a kid, like they take it to these extremes, but when you realize that at a very, very base level, trauma is just when something happens that your body and your brain and your emotions have no idea how to react.
Right.
So you kind of kick into this, like, it's almost like safe mode on a Windows computer. You have no idea what that computer is actually doing at the moment, but you know that it's a very, very basic function that you might not be able to divine who has what type of physical reaction.
Yeah, exactly. And those traumas, can be physical in nature. They can be repetitive in nature, right? Just repetitive micro traumas. They can be loss of a loved one. Mm-hmm. You had this tragic loss of a loved one. I lost my 9-year-old daughter to a brain tumor. That's significant trauma. It can be, cumulative stress in a relationship where there's emotional neglect or emotional abuse. verbal and physical abuse. It can be, you're right, it doesn't have to be this massive macro trauma.
Right.
And I agree, in 20 years of taking physical health histories of people, you ask people any trauma, and their immediate response is generally no.
Mm-hmm.
And then you dig in prospectively and you go, oh yeah, well I was in that car accident, or I broke my ankle when I was in high school, or all of a sudden they start to see that. What do you think is the most important thing, or one of the top few most important things that the general public should know about suicide, and or where and how we can pay attention to people who are in need?
Well, I think one of the most important things to realize just about the topic of mental health and suicide on the whole is that it doesn't really matter where you come from or how you appear. Everyone is impacted. And it's, like when we were first talking about the impacts of COVID back in, late March, early April, there was this idea that there would be some that would be shielded from it. And I think we can all kind of agree that we've all experienced this collective trauma that isn't just financial, it isn't just health related, it's when is this going to end? That indefinite terror, that is traumatic, even for me. And I've had a couple moments through the course of this, our first pandemic, as realizing that I have no idea what's going on. And to have, I got 3 kids, a 12-year-old and 2 10-year-olds, and when they're looking at me for guidance, I'm going, I'm with you. I have no idea what's happening. It's one of the most important things to remember is that there's no way to define someone who is susceptible, but it's also understanding that gives you the freedom to understand that everybody's going through something right now. So when you talk about suicide, you think, oh, I'm gonna look for somebody who's depressed and see what I can do to help. You don't have to be depressed to attempt suicide, but it's also being able to you wanna pick your words, meaning like we talked about what and why. You wanna lean on the what, because that's just bullet points. You're leading to problem solving. You start asking people why they feel a certain way. Now it's justification. I'm trying to prove to you that this is why I feel that way, and it's okay compared to somebody else's larger problem, right?
Shame comes into the
exactly.
equation. Right?
So if we can just understand that the person next to you in the bank drive-thru, or the person that's 6 feet behind you checking out at the grocery store, they're just as worried as you are, if not more, because maybe their situation's different.
Right.
It gives you the freedom not to have to put 2 people and compare them. And it's like, when we're doing these education things, and we used to do them in person in schools and city halls and police stations and companies and corporations and church groups and all that stuff. And now we've kind of pivoted and we're doing most of it via Zoom, of course. But when you tell people, if I said that the guy over there is a Vietnam vet, or not even a Vietnam vet, he's just a vet returning from war, you automatically give this guy all the room in the world to experience life as he's experiencing it. Susceptible to substance abuse, hard time holding down a job, long-term relationships might be more difficult. He might be, sudden movements. All those things, you're like, yeah, it's to be expected. He's been through some stuff, right? But then if you say, oh, he or she is a survivor of sexual assault, it's ooh. But then subconsciously, we start breaking down a way of comparing them to that veteran. Because you're like, oh, well, were you drinking? Were you out alone? As if you can't drink and be out alone in America in 2020.
Right.
But we cut people off subconsciously, because it's kind of ingrained in us to compare either us to somebody else or 2 people to one another. And we expect people to be where we think they should be. But Hope for the Day is founded on the idea of we should meet people where they're at, not where we expect them to be. Which changes the conversation, because when there's no expectation, it's just 2 people saying, hey, and you lower that need to define what someone is or what they should be.
Yeah, that's a great point. In trauma, those 2 traumas are not any really different on how the body processes it.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the reasons we tend to get into judgment is we're more uncomfortable with those sexual assaults. We're not willing to sit in that uncomfortability of it. So we wall off because we have no idea how to handle the conversation.
Right.
And that's super unfair to the victim.
It is.
And that creates more isolation and generally propels the problem. So great conversation here. Tell me a little bit about Suicide Prevention Month and things that you might have going on, and really what the message is that we want to get out to people.
So just like with every organization that had all of their actual fundraisers canceled, we're doing some things that are specific to raising funds and a lot of things that are related to just getting the conversation started and then bringing awareness to just the topic in and of itself. So like I said, I'm an alderman out in Yorkville, Illinois, and for the past 3 years I've been doing like an outreach project myself, which is where I just cold call, email as many elected officials across the country as I can, and I give them a proclamation to adopt, which states 3 things. Number 1, suicide is an issue. Number 2, there are mental health resources available, literally everywhere. You just have to know how to find them, and I can help with that. But then number 3, you are enough. So I started that in 2017 after the loss of my friend Mike as my kind of working through pain. That was what I did to distract myself from the fact that I'm still uncomfortable talking about it. And then my goal in 2018 was to do it again, but to get myself educated. And that's how I found Hope for the Day. 2019, I did it again, but officially under the auspices of HFTD's umbrella. And then later on in actually right before Suicide Prevention Month last year, I was officially brought on as the policy director, and I work in strategic partnerships. So working with breweries to release beers that talk about mental health and suicide prevention. We work with corporations to bring education into their offices and stuff like that. So this year in 2019, doing the same project, of course, my outreach stopped on March 13th because it just felt strange. But I just got an email before I came in that we hit 51 cities in 12 or 14 different states, all adopting the same proclamation, which talks about suicide, like I said, is an issue. There are resources available. There are organizations like Hope for the Day trying to bring people access to those resources. And then again, reminding people that you're enough. And you don't have to justify what you're experiencing. So that's one arm. That's like in our policy, small government arm. Our big fundraiser this September is the Stigma Swear Jar, where we partnered with a number of different small businesses and larger businesses and some pretty world famous musicians that will be being launched on World Suicide Prevention Day, which is September 10th. We're trying to get people to realize that the reason why they might not talk about things is the silence of stigma. So it's the Stigma Swear Jar. We're asking people to swear, tell stigma how you really feel, share that with your community, and then try to help support Hope for the Day. So it's a super easy platform to donate $5, $10, $15, $1,000 if you'd like. But then also we're encouraging people to use that hashtag Stigma Swear Jar and literally call out the stigmas that are silencing them. Because when you think about this from the standpoint that we've got stereotypes and you've got stigmas, and when you realize how they function or they sound the same once in a while, but the stigmas keep you silent, but the stereotypes impact what you do and how you act.
Right.
So when you know the difference between them and you realize that you have been stigmatizing yourself, you have been unfortunately stigmatizing people around you, when you are aware of them and you address them, just because that 800-pound gorilla is in the room doesn't mean you have to carry it. So when you are aware of it, you don't have to be perfect, but you can sometimes give yourself a break because you're realizing, wow, I am 100% stigmatizing my own experiences because I don't feel that it's important to share with the people around me in this particular cultural situation.
So again, giving a voice to it.
Exactly.
Right? Like when we name it, we claim it, it decreases the effect on us.
Yeah.
We bring people in, right? The sense of community into that,
Yeah.
which lessens our isolation.
Exactly.
I love the expression that you're enough,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that goes along with be okay, not being okay.
Yeah.
Right? Or I like to say, love your messy self.
Yeah.
Most of us are messy, and we've been through a lot. And I think, again, if we can just give each other a lot of grace and assume the best of others.
Or at least not having to worry about assuming the worst. That's the one thing that when I started paying attention to what I was doing subconsciously, it's almost like losing 20 pounds going, wow, I didn't even know what it felt like to not have an expectation of how to be treated. I mean, if somebody comes at me throwing blows, yeah, it's going to be different. But think about every interaction you have around you. People aren't inadvertently out to kind of go get you.
Right.
So there's no need to do this extra brain work to compare someone, how they look to you, what you're making assumptions on, to what you think they should be. And then somehow not giving them all the respect they deserve simply because they don't match up with your expectation. That's a really, really big waste of time.
It is.
And energy.
And sometimes we see that bringing this back full circle, back to our bread and butter, the physical medicine world, I know when I'm not physically feeling well, I'm less patient, less understanding, less compassionate. And that's something to consider in this equation.
Yeah.
Some of the resources that I was reviewing, there's a 2 or 3% greater chance of suicide when chronic pain is involved. One of the research studies showed that it's not insignificant in the correlation of physical pain, depression, and then leading to suicide, and that's part of the progression. So part of our story again in this collaborative approach to healthcare, the best of medicine, chiropractic, physical therapy. We're going to initiate some greater reaches within the mental health arena. We need to make sure that we're taking care of all of our person, mind, body, spirit. And so we just encourage people, if you're in physical pain, if you're having limited ability to self-care and get out and do things that are important to you, like participating with your family or exercise or sporting event, these sorts of outdoor things, things that you love to do, we got to take care of that. And I think that's our bread and butter. We encourage you to do that. Tell me a little more about where you guys see in your educational process about self-care, things that people should be doing on the preemptive preventative side of depression, suicide, mental health.
Cool, yeah. So there's a couple different ways to kind of approach the whole self-care thing, because like when I say the word safe space, I'm waiting to hear a snicker, like, oh, you snowflakes. No. A safe space is where you feel comfortable. It's not that you have to get up and perform some interpretive dance. It's like, oh, this is a place where I can talk to you, I'm being honest, you're listening, you're being attentive. Our idea is to focus on the things that we do for ourselves and define them generally as self-expression. So like for me personally, I like playing guitar, especially loud if I can. I like listening to music loud, I like writing, I like reading, I like watching TV with my wife. Like we watch our programs. I rub her feet, we throw on the stem on our lower back, we're old people, we watch our programs, get a snack out of the icebox. But we focus on this idea that it has to be a hobby, but then I'm 40, so my generation, it's not a hobby anymore, it's a side hustle, right? It's always this, well, if you're not making something off of it, why are you doing it? You have to realize that the act of doing something you enjoy is enough. You don't have to profit off of everything that you find interesting. That's part of the problem with this idea of defining something as self-expression, is that somebody goes, oh, well, if it's a hobby, it could be a side hustle, you're just not trying hard enough. We're stigmatizing people there too. Right. So it's doing the things that you enjoy doing that make you feel more closer to your baseline. So for me, washing dishes, for some reason, you know what I can't do when I'm washing dishes? Just touch that damn phone. So I know that washing dishes is, my mind is off, I'm just focusing on what I'm washing. And my friend Moses, I was in a band with him for a number of years, and I was over at his house for rehearsal. I'm like, man, you got a lot of dishes. He's like, yeah, that's tomorrow. And he was all excited. I'm like, why? I can turn the brain off and just wash the dishes, man. What do you think? And that was when I was like 22, 23, and now I'm just finally realizing I earned the respect for doing dishes from my friend Moses, because it reminded me that I have the ability to not answer my phone, or answer a text, or answer an email. And I'm getting better at that, but I still beat myself up and check emails at like 2 a.m. because I have a kind of a erratic mind once in a while, right? Mm-hmm. But it's realizing that it doesn't have to be a hobby. It could be doing the dishes. Or like for me, I reorganized my basement. Like it went from nothing to end of April, I had a little office. And it's like keeping my hands busy with self-expression. But it's also, talk about self-care Sundays or self-care Saturdays, yoga and bath bombs and long walks on the beach, and like they don't have to be super romantic. They can be as simple as turning the TV on and watching Supermarket Sweep on Netflix. That's enjoyable as heck. So it's understanding that as life stressors increase, what you do for yourself in the form of self-expression or self-care should always outweigh life stressors. And yes, it's nearly impossible, but that should be the goal. Right. And I'm just as guilty as everyone else of foregoing the things that make me feel more closer to my baseline and piling on and piling on and piling on. But once I'm coming out of a very, very stressful past couple weeks, and I'm realizing that I was doing a lot of it to myself. But it's being okay with the fact that I'm not going to be perfect. So it's okay not to be okay. We've got that on t-shirts, on wristbands, it's everywhere. That's one of the ways that we're advocating for people to literally not take this so seriously, to assume that they have to be either on, performing, or at work 24 hours a day. It's impossible to do. Right. So part of our curriculum talks about what are you doing to valve off. So we use the soda bottle as an example. We go in and talk to a group of school kids. If I shake a Coke bottle in front of kids, they're going, oh, because what happens when you open up a Coke bottle right away? It goes everywhere. Well, if this is your brain and you don't go to become more closer to your baseline, you can enter that crisis stage, and that's when things get messy. Right. So that's a physical representation of what's going on in our brain. So that valving is everything I just talked about: guitar, music, rubbing my wife's feet, washing them dishes. All of those things bring me closer to my baseline. And I have to respect that if I deviate from doing those things, the likelihood of my bottle literally exploding is greater, because that's that crisis stage that we're trying to get people out of. And unfortunately, this wasn't taught to us when I was in grade school and high school. My kids, I think, understand because I'm honest with them. Like when I'm stressed out, like you trying to be funny is not going to help me be less stressed out. This is something that doesn't really happen with other people involved. Sometimes you have to kind of take on the responsibility yourself. The way that I did it last night is I completely unloaded on my wife, not negatively towards her, but all the things that are ticking me off. And then she walked out of the room and I started my Zoom meeting and I'm like, I feel like 50 pounds lighter. Because again, you stigmatize yourself, so you suppress it.
Right.
Well, when you suppress yourself, you get closer to that depression and you start isolating. Well, if you get past that depression and isolation and don't return to valving off, it's still pent up, which means you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't really behave in a way that's closer to how you normally feel, because I know the word normal doesn't exist anymore. Like March 13th ended that, right? But respecting the fact that nobody has any idea what's going on, you don't have to act a certain way. You just gotta not hurt people, you know? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just stay in your lane and respect the fact that you deserve to be comfortable. And that's exercising, taking care of yourself, self-care and self-expression, bring you back down to that baseline and valve off that soda bottle. That's how we prevent suicides, by reminding people of that.
I think some great points there. I'm reminded of a quote in a book called The One Thing, and he talks about, you know, this idea of living life in balance, and really living life in balance is kind of never going to happen. So it's counterbalance, right? And you just talked about a couple of weeks that were very stressful, which is going to happen. And sometimes we get caught up and go, oh my gosh, I was so out of balance. Well, then just counterbalance, right? Just find an opportunity now to valve off, as you said. And that self-care is going to look different for a lot of people. That might be the spa or getting your nails done or that kind of stuff. Or for me, it might be several hours on the bicycle, right? Just pounding the pavement and doing some resilient grieving and valving off in that direction. Well, great stuff. You know, I want to remind people that you know, mental health is a real issue. And the stigma, I think we just need to have greater conversations about that depression and anxiety and you know, some of the more extremes, the bipolars and schizophrenia and some of these things that are out on the edge. There's a lot of people who struggle with these things, and they're very real. They're not made up. They're affecting lots of people, and if we can one, just have conversations like this, let people know that it's okay to talk about them. I've personally struggled with general anxiety disorder. I'm a very high-strung guy, and then when I'm not valving off, all that worry comes into hyper-focus. And sometimes it's hard to stay in today, so you start worrying about what 3 days from now is going to look like, and all of a sudden it's just chaos in that brain. And then you either want to overdo or you want to completely shut down. So I've tried to at least just recognize that that's part of my operating system. I'm okay with that. I don't love it, but I'm okay with it.
I'm the same way.
And then finding ways to deal with that, which one, staying present, right? Staying in today. What can I control today? And knowing that tomorrow's gonna come. And I was also reminded, as you said this, what are you doing this afternoon? Because I got plenty of dishes to do. Sounds like a great, your wife might really enjoy it.
Well, I mean, she's at home with the kids with e-learning right now, so it's like, she's a saint. But it also doesn't hide the fact that, like, I need to feel like I'm participating at home, even though, you know, I'm working full-time at the pharmacy and she's working full-time at home. Just having something to do that I feel like I'm doing it for her, which is also as a form of self-care. I like doing things for people, right? And that's one of the reasons why when I got involved in Hope for the Day, or with Hope for the Day, I liked it because I didn't have to do anything besides be myself and then focus on myself. And it's not that I'm trying to be selfish, it's that if I'm no good for Joel, I'm no good for my wife or my kids or my family or anybody else around me. And it wasn't like I was learning this, new form of selfishness. It was realizing that if I would have just been told 3 or 4 different sentences that have impacted me greatly over the last 3 years, if I would have been told those sentences when I was like 9, 10, maybe I wouldn't have gone through life assuming that I was broken. Like, why is my mind a scatterbrain? Well, I just recently got diagnosed with ADHD. Do you know that when you learn about what it is that you might be diagnosed with as a disability, there are people out there that turn their disabilities into like these superpowers, right? And I now know what works. Post-it notes and daily lists. And I take the list from yesterday and I go, okay, what didn't I scratch off? And I add it to the new one. And what I've been doing is I've been keeping the Post-it notes and the lists, because sometimes when I'm ticked off because I'm not doing enough, I can go ahead and look at that stack of chicken scratch. I've done all of this, which you wouldn't have any idea what the heck I wrote down, because it's, a secret code. But it's, again, I need to remind myself that it's okay not to be okay, but I've already done so much. So why am I beating myself up? It's something that you have to be aware of. If you're not cognizant in the moment, you will always revert back to what's easy. And it's easy to start punching inward all the time. Yeah. So I'm trying to not be old Joel by me talking about mental health in front of as many people as possible. I'm giving myself permission to admit that I have faults. I've been a poor father, I've been a poor husband, I've been a poor employee, I've been a poor friend. But those are all things that I have been. And by focusing on them as being something that actually happened, I'm not beating myself up. I'm giving myself permission to improve. And that's exactly what we do. We talk about self-care. Like, my wife and I started doing these workouts in the basement right around Thanksgiving. And I was coming back from a foot injury. I had a plantar warp that got out of control. So instead of a small little hole with a laser, it was a golf ball size hole. So I can't wear shoes and socks when I work out because it gets sweaty and it just hurts the skin, right? So I work out barefoot on a yoga mat in my basement every morning between 5 and 6 a.m. And it's completely changed the way that we do things, because now the alarm goes off when I get up. Like, that's new. I can give myself high fives over that, because that's a good life improvement, right? It's realizing that you're not going to be, Michelangelo the next day when you first start sketching. You have to kind of appreciate the journey. It doesn't mean I don't enjoy the destination, right? But respecting the fact that we're all works in progress, it's okay not to be okay. Yeah. That completely ruins this idea that I have to be something that I'm not. I'm just the way that I am. And I can want to be better, but that doesn't mean that what I am right now isn't pretty awesome. So accepting the fact that I'm enough.
In progress over perfection.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the same thing with our life journey, but it's also the same thing with how we approach physical health, right? A lot of people talk about chiropractic and physical therapy, and why do I need so many visits? And I just want to be like, can you just get me out of pain?
Crack me and send me on.
Yeah, the idea is that would be great if it worked, but it doesn't work, because our body has memory and we're routine. We have to break those cycles. So it is a process, and you touched on, and some people might pick up on the harshness of you saying that you're a poor father, a poor husband, or that is just admittance of our weaknesses. Yeah. Those who have a spiritual background, from myself as a Christian, I know that my faith, I'm only met by God in my weaknesses. God strengthens my weaknesses, not my strengths. Right. And so being humble and recognizing those weaknesses is just an admittance that I missed the mark over here, and I'm going to try to do better today. Yeah. And I may not get it right, probably won't, but I'm going to try. Yeah. And I'm going to keep that journey. So
yeah, you want to fail forward, and that's if you make them. And this is something I think I've yelled up the stairs at my kids 1,000 times. If you're not learning from your mistakes, that's literally the definition of insanity. Right. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. My dad's been pounding that into me since I was a kid. Well, if they do something and get in trouble for it, but then do it again and do it again and do it again, they're not learning. So just acknowledging the fact that you've done something, and this is something that I've been pretty hardcore on them, because they as a kid, your first instinct is to defend yourself. Why you did something, it was this way, not that way. And I've been very, very specific with my 12-year-old. If you are actively getting in trouble, what is the number one rule? This is the only time he can say it to me. And I went forward, he goes, shut up. Okay, so if you're actively getting in trouble, what is your mouth? A shovel. If you keep talking, what am I doing? Or what are you doing? Digging the hole. Okay, so again, and I'm serious, because if you're in the moment getting in trouble, stop talking. Accept what's happening, protect yourself, yes. But that's whether it's a teacher or a police officer or a coach. Don't defend yourself. Wait till the moment has calmed down, and then you can kind of analyze and you can discuss it without those high emotions. And you'd be surprised, like I have 10-year-old twins. My son Mason, he's 10 years old, he's me. but I have an opportunity to communicate with me as a 10-year-old in my house. So every instinct that I have, that I still have, he has, but it's 10 years old.
Right.
So for me to go, honestly, you made a mistake, it's totally okay. Admit it, and we will all move on. But if you fight against it, you're resisting, and now you're gonna get grounded from something for a week.
Right.
So like when he, hauls off and smacks his sister, dude, go up to your room. I didn't do it, she started it. Like, don't do that. Because if you go up to your room and I say to go up to your room, 5 minutes, hey, come on down, dinner's ready. And it's over.
We can de-escalate.
Exactly.
Yeah, be quick to forgive and move on.
But understanding that that's life. Like, what if every time you got a bill, you opened it up and said, I didn't make that phone call? Is life it's gonna be that exhausting.
Right.
When you realize that you don't have to react to everything, by being proactive and knowing that when you get that bill, you got the money in the bank. It's the same with getting yelled at by your parents. Whatever I did, I shouldn't do it that way again, because it will happen again. And maybe the next time it'll be much worse. Like, I think parenting, just in the last 3 years, since I started taking more accountability for just the fact that I shut a lot of my emotions out because it was never something that I was acceptable to talk about.
Right.
Once it became more acceptable to talk about, not in front of my wife and kids, but with a counselor, just trying to get things off of my chest, you realize you believe things that make absolutely no sense. You hold yourself to a standard that not even the people you think are judging you can hold themselves to. We're all like,
or even holding you to.
Exactly.
Really, right?
We make, like my dad used to say, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. And I think to kind of wrap the whole conversation up, you can make a mountain out of a molehill internally, and you know how damaging it is. But imagine somebody telling you how they feel or what they're experiencing, and you diminish that. And you make that, or you say, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Now, if I'm crying over the fact that I got little pieces of onion in my salad, that's a mountain out of a molehill. Just get a new salad or get the freaking onions, right? But if I tell someone who's going through something that what they're experiencing isn't what they're experiencing, they should, man up, boys don't cry, get over it. That's stigma talking out of your mouth, and what you're doing is you're literally piling onto someone who has already expressed that they're experiencing something. So I'm just trying to be more cognizant of those that are in front of me that are visibly and noticeably out of sorts. And just by being, what's going on with you? What's making you feel that way? Those what questions, or how did you get to this place? Or when did that happen? I never want to revert to the why, because again, it's justification, and it's somebody trying to legitimize why they feel a certain way, when you are entitled to feel any way that you have. Because it's not the person who is judging that is entitled to that experience. It's the person who experiences the intensity of that, whether it's a traumatic experience or a stressful experience. It's incredibly freeing just not to assume you have to judge every person you interact with. Right. And it's like, literally, it feels like 50 pounds of weight has been taken off my shoulders, because I don't care if I look a certain way to you. Just know that I'm not concerned with what you think about me. I think about you with perfect respect. You've been totally nice to me, it's a great place, nothing's wrong. That's it. I don't have to dig any deeper. So when you cut off that need to constantly try to compare to people or compare someone to how you feel, that's how you become exhausted. My friend Janine had a great way of explaining stigma. Stigma is to her comparing her insides to someone else's outsides. And I was like, why is it so simple when you think about it and you describe it? Right. But when you're trying to kind of analyze those stigmas that you hold, whether it's in certain social situations or, like you talked about physical pain. If I would have gone to the doctor maybe 6 months before I finally did for my foot, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in. And what did I do? I manned up. I didn't complain about it. I just went to work. That's the problem with the stigma surrounding, especially men, and admitting that physical pain is real. Mm-hmm. Like saying, oh, well, I'm in my 40s, I should have some aches and pains. Well, there's a difference between soreness from a workout, right, or soreness because you literally tweaked your back, and if you keep doing what you're doing, you're gonna have back pain for the rest of your life. It's acknowledging and taking yourself seriously. Something happened, I just wanna go get it checked out. That's how you get things off your chest, and that literally, you lose weight.
Yeah, I think our generation still was taught that, right? Like that still was instilled, and our fathers even more so. So we got a very similar influence on that. I want to validate that you're having this conversation with your sons and your daughters, and recognizing that your traits come through, yeah, but you're able to have the conversation and maybe maybe change the direction a little bit.
Yeah.
So I really want to acknowledge you on that. To come back to recognizing that pain, I think a couple of things to kind of consider. People might consider, when do I go get something checked out? When it's a persistent problem, when it's lasting longer than a week, probably means you should get it checked out.
Yeah.
When it's starting to limit what you do, changes your behavioral patterns,
A noticeable impact on your everyday life.
you should go get that checked out.
Yeah.
When it's affecting your mood and outlook towards life, you need to get that checked out. And if you're not checking yourself on that, ask somebody that you're close to, your spouse, your children, is dad been a little off with this thing? And if that's persistent, it's time to get it checked out. And we have lots of resources to help with the physical aspect of that, which can also improve the mental health of that. The last thing I really want to recognize and validate, and again, maybe more so to the guys, and maybe even more so to the guys that are in our peer group. For the first time in my life, I'm recognizing that I have feelings and that it's okay to have feelings.
Yeah.
And actually starting to identify different feelings other than happy and pissed off.
Yes.
So there's a whole spectrum of feelings that I can acknowledge and start to go, hey, this is what true sadness feels like. This is what joy feels like. This is what I can experience two feelings at the same time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can go, look, there's a lot to be joyful about today, yet I'm very anxious about X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, just being able to define what anxiety feels like. I think I honestly just put my finger on it about a year ago. For me, anxiety feels like I have to go, but it was yesterday. It's that, and it's not just physical, it's not just mental, it's not just emotional. It's like I can feel myself subconsciously jerking, and that's how anxiety kind of manifests itself in myself, at least with me. And I'm 40. It was 39 when I realized that is based in anxiety.
And I think it's important to admit that and recognize that way too often that leads to process addiction, escape through many different forms, and that can be substance, it can be shopping, it can be gaming, it can be other processes that I won't go into right now.
Yeah.
There's way too many temptations in this world. So if you're finding yourself feeling that I need to go, but I don't know where, or I'm bajiggity, and you're finding an escape that you always go to, that's concerning and really needs to have a discussion. I think the other thing that I want to validate is the idea that it's okay to seek counseling.
Yeah.
It's okay to seek either a coach or a counselor or a professional to talk through what's going on.
Yeah.
Again, if we put a voice to it, we name it, we claim it, we start to decrease its influence in our life.
Yeah.
And that opens space, that creates room for you to have greater happiness and greater experiences and engage in true relationship.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of part of what Hope for the Day was kind of founded on. So Johnny Boucher founded it in 2011 after he lost his 9th friend or family member to suicide. He's now currently at 16 friends or family members that have completed suicide. He's also been recently diagnosed with PTSD, and there was a stigma around that where he wasn't ready to accept the fact that they were right. He was acting differently. He had to basically swallow his own medicine and realize that it's okay to have things happen to you that were not planned, but it's all in how you respond to things. And that's another thing that I am constantly telling my kids: you're not going to be judged for what happens to you. You're going to be judged for how you respond to it.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly defending what's happening to us or what's happening around us, what ends up happening is you forget why you feel a certain way, and it becomes one of those beliefs that you don't really remember why you think this way, which is the root of all stigmas. Are based in things, like my dad calls it, it's the writing on the inside of your mind that you don't know who wrote it, and the person who wrote it has no idea who wrote it on the inside of their mind. We have no idea where these things come from. We can think about them culturally and try to trace them back, but think about yourself right now, why you act a certain way in a certain situation. It's not always a smart, like I was telling you, I was learning things about my brain, like, why do I think that? That's not even rooted in fact. Your brain goes to it's the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
So when you realize that, if my hardest thing was accepting the fact that I just needed to talk to somebody, why was it wasn't until I met Hope for the Day that I was able to actually reach out? Well, it was because what Hope for the Day did was they lowered that expectation that, oh, I have to be feeling this way, or I have to be actually suicidal to go talk to a counselor. Hope for the Day is making the conversation or starting the conversation about mental health and proactive prevention, because when you talk about things before they become problems, you can head them off. But if you talk about them and we're only reactive as a society, like think about the last big suicide that you learned about. For a couple weeks, there's a hashtag, there's a whole bunch of people posting, oh, hey, if you ever need something, give me a call. And then it dies down because our attention spans are only so long. Now, I don't know if I'm thankful that this happened, or I'm still a little frustrated with the fact that I was so hung up on why am I so hurt? Well, when I was actually going to counseling after the suicide of my friend Mike, I realized that I never focused on the suicide of my roommate in college, Fossil Derezhny, in 2003. He completed on May 10th, 2003, Mother's Day, and the day he was supposed to graduate college. And then when I'm talking about that, I realized that I never properly emoted over the suicide of my friend Howie when I was 12. Why didn't I talk about those things? Well, I was busy. I was graduating junior high, or when my friend Fossil died, I had just bought a house, just got engaged. Life was busy, so I didn't give it the attention that it needed, and it metastasized inside of myself. And finally, when Mike died, it all opened up. So if you don't at least acknowledge, and you say validate, that's a beautiful word because it means that it is what it is. And there's no judgment, yay or nay, it's just what it is, and that means that, you know what, you're right, that exists. And by just validating somebody's emotions, thoughts, feelings, and emotions, you can lessen that likelihood that they're going to either attempt or consider. Like suicidal ideation is real. I think we all kind of have experience where we talk about internally, what if I wasn't here, it'd be so much easier. Or I wouldn't be bringing this place down, stuff like that. But what Hope for the Day is doing is pointing people in direction of resources. So we call it raising the visibility. So we raise the visibility of where you can find a counselor, but also through repeating things like it's okay not to be okay, and having them on billboards and cans of beer and other different types of products all over the world. We're trying to convince people that the things that we might have been, or we should have been kind of approached with as far as education when we were very, very young, are now things that we have to learn the hard way by losing friends and family to suicide. So by talking about it before it becomes a problem, we are proactively preventing suicide. And it's when you have a big bearded muscular guy with tattoos saying, I'm gonna go see my counselor. Maybe that's one of the few ways we can get men to realize that, dude, if you think it's weak to go talk to a counselor, maybe you just need to get a counselor that's bigger than you are. You know?
Yeah, and I'm going to just, it's not weak at all. It actually takes great courage, right? It takes great courage and vulnerability to go, look, I need to chat with somebody. And I want to find an easier, softer way to just navigate life. Yeah. I want to acknowledge one other thing here is that cumulative trauma, right? So what you were just describing is very common. And I think even more so with guys. Guys can compartmentalize very well. Ladies, not as much. Their emotional chain is connected to everything. There's the book, the spaghetti brain versus the waffle brain. Don't love the analogy, but you get it. I kind of mention it this way. I think ladies typically have this very beautiful brain that is like a very fine, detailed, well-crafted watch. Mm-hmm. Every gear interchange, you change one gear and it affects all emotions. Where for me, I got one gear. Yep. It's one box. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty good and on when I'm in that box, but that box never touches any other box. No. And so we can compartmentalize a trauma that happened at 12 and a trauma that happened at 18. Mm-hmm. And at some point, there's another trauma that all of a sudden the floodgates open. Yep. So I just want to acknowledge out there that that cumulative trauma is very real, not only in the mental health space, but tying it again back into the physical med space. Absolutely. That cumulative trauma is very real, and we tend to underestimate it. And it's time to have the discussion. It's time to open up the communication that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to seek help. Mm-hmm. We weren't put on this planet Earth to do it alone. Mm-hmm. The social, emotional effect of what's going on with our pandemic is isolating us from people. And my only hope is that helps us recognize, how much of a gift it really is, how valuable it is to have each other.
Yeah.
I think we could carry on this conversation for quite a while.
For sure.
I really enjoyed your shares. I really enjoyed your vulnerability of what you've been through and why you're doing the work that you're doing. I think it's very commendable work. I think it's important work. And at Anodyne, we want to find ways to back and support. We want to continue the conversation. We really know that our physical medicine world affects our mental health world and vice versa.
Yeah.
So, Joel, it was great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And maybe we can continue the conversation on another day.
Always down for that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.